Take us through each bull run, not the cycle, but each specific, the bull runs in Bitcoin usually last only around a year. There's one in 2013, one in 2017. Now we're in the middle of one right now, and you've been through them all. How has each one been different in your opinion? And what are the similarities that you see in each one?
Yeah, 2013 was really special. So that was my first bull run. And it went from $10 to 260 in March 2013, back down to 100, sideways chopped. Then around October, November, went from 100 to 1200 by the end of December. What was unique about that one is there's so many structural problems. So Silk Road got shut down in October. People forget that. I mean, that was a big deal. Like we thought, what if that was the only demand for Bitcoin? We didn't know. There wasn't on-chain analysis. There were no blogs, there were no YouTube channels talking about on-chain data at all. So we weren't sure, like, oh man, will demand come back? Mount Gox got shut down too a couple times. It had its Dwala accounts frozen in the US. And I think that was like July, August. And then by February 14, I think they had like fully shut down or like halted withdrawals completely. There was a lot of structural problems. I mean, Mount Gox was like this giant, they were 90% of trading volume and they were super rickety, and we're just lucky exchange companies like Coinbase didn't get trapped in that. Coinbase wasn't an exchange back then. They were just a brokerage. They created GDAX, remember? And then GDAX became Coinbase Pro. People forget that like Coinbase wasn't always an exchange. They were sourcing coins from Bitstamp, fortunately. But what if they had been sourcing coins from Gox? Like we didn't know that either. I don't think they publicized that. So Gox was a huge structural problem. We had Silk Road getting shut down. That shut down a lot of demand. We weren't sure if our doors were going to get kicked in. Honestly, there wasn't a lot of regulatory clearance in terms of like what we were allowed to do. Now, of course, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. We still weren't sure, being public faces of this new movement, if we were going to have our doors kicked in and then be like, okay, well, we're going to clamp down on this. We understand what Bitcoin is, and we think it's a threat. So that was very much the vibe in 13. It was like very like Wild West. 2017, in early 17 is when I think Bitcoin broke. I think that's when Bitcoin broke 1,000. Yeah, I think that's when Bitcoin broke 1,000. It was like January 17. And then that year was just kind of a continuous surge with some little drawdowns. And of course, that one was you've had the huge moment of like ICOs being the narrative. I mean, I was in Silicon Valley and literally the word ICO was being whispered every single place you went to, everywhere. And people were inserting ICOs and tokens into everything. I worked at Uber at the time, and we put together a blockchain strike force team to talk about how blockchain technology could be implemented at Uber. And, we basically this was in 17, and we basically walked away from it going, we don't think it's useful for Uber at all. But people were just like, can we put a blockchain on it, was the vibe then. And there was just so much froth with all of the tokens that it was just insane, right? I mean, it was kind of mania, I would say. Like the vibe was just mania because there's so many coins, 100xing, 1000xing, that it was just mania. What I would say would be the vibe. 2021, I think, is more serious, like kind of a serious tone to it, mixed with a little bit of absurdity as well. Serious because now it's finally mainstream. You've got one of the wealthiest people in the world, Elon Musk, who's into it. You've got his companies. You've got other big billionaires and mainstream investors and hedge funds and insurance companies and some sovereigns. So Venezuela talking about adopting Bitcoin. Bitcoin's entered the final arena, the biggest game, and so things are a little bit more serious in terms of the stakes and in terms of like the narrative. I would say Bitcoin, like content wise, like there wasn't a lot of content before 2017. Like you've got myself and many others and y'all who have great YouTube channels and podcasts and long form content. And there's even like documentaries now. There really wasn't much of that before 2017. It was kind of a lonely existence when you were a Bitcoin hodler. Like I went to the halving party at BitGo down, not San Mateo, I think down in Palo Alto for 2016 halving. There's like 15 of us. It was, yeah, it wasn't like as big of a celebration like 2020, where like the halving then was a big deal. There was, even websites dedicated. There wasn't even like a website for the halving back in 16. Like, I don't remember one. I'm sure there was one, but I don't remember one. So 2021, it's big. Bitcoin is big. There's hundreds of millions of people that use it. At the same time, there's the absurdity of the market as well, which I thought was going to go away in the 2021 cycle, but I was very, very wrong, which was in Dogecoin or something, right? Like, retail sentiment to speculate on different assets was more than I ever expected. So yeah, I would say that that was probably the more surprising thing. But you know, crypto is now mainstream. Bitcoin is now mainstream, and so I think that's the very distinct difference between the last 17 bull run and this one.
And speaking of history repeating or rhyming, and you kind of already said this, but it was very frothy back in 2017 with adding a coin, adding a blockchain. In a lot of ways, we are seeing that same froth with DeFi and NFTs. Most of it is garbage, in my opinion. Is there anything outside of Bitcoin that interests you, especially when you see publicly traded companies or notable people in the space finding interest?
The DeFi space is, of course, very interesting, and I've done an exploration over there, both on my YouTube channel. So on there, I've done some explorations of, like, for example, Stacks. Stacks it has a really interesting interaction with Bitcoin. There's other ones I'm going to explore as well, which would be Sovereign, so SOV. There's also, like, for example, like Lightning is technically DeFi. I think people don't mentally bucket like Lightning and smart contracts on Bitcoin as DeFi, but the term of DeFi in terms of like defining it is pretty fluid. There's some DeFi projects that have a central control to it, central wallet, as we saw with that gigantic hack last week. So the term DeFi is somewhat subjective, but I would say Bitcoin has a lot of really cool things too, like distributed log contracts are really cool on Bitcoin. So there's a lot of like Bitcoin DeFi stuff that I'm digging into. And of course, studying other DeFi and other cryptos, I've looked at those, studied those. The AMM stuff is super interesting. I feel like some of the AMM stuff is a little bit disingenuous though, where like folks are like, oh, you can throw off this yield on your coin. I'm like, yeah, but if the market moves one direction for a long time, you're going to have a lot more of the other asset and less of the asset you originally posted in the liquidity pool. And they're like, oh, well, you might make up for that with fees. I'm like, well, maybe. But so I feel like some of the AMM stuff is fascinating, but at the same time, I think marketed in a way that isn't completely genuine, where people are talking about these yields, where it's like, cool, yeah, you're throwing, you have these things called like impermanent loss. You also have, it's a lot of incentivized yield, where they're like, cool, we give you our governance token as a way to bootstrap liquidity and incentivize yield. But then it's just a game of choosing, of jumping between liquidity pool to liquidity pool, trying to chase that incentive yield. And so I don't know how long that game can last, right?
Love to get your price prediction, where you think Bitcoin's going to go, maybe by the end of this year, or maybe you want to do it at the end of the cycle in case the cycle goes into next year, however you think about it. But in the context of this cycle, this bull run, how high do you see Bitcoin going?
Well, if we repeat 2013, we could see Bitcoin hitting between $300,000 and $400,000 a Bitcoin. Now, history usually rhymes, it doesn't repeat itself, so it's probably not going to be exactly that. But if it did, that would be my best price point. So my price point, I would say that I think it's going to land between, is probably between 1 and 300,000. But if we match 13 again, it could be 300 to 400,000.
Damn. Dan, appreciate you sharing your time coming on. The link to Dan's YouTube channel is down below in the video description. Final thoughts for our audience.
Well, I've waited 9 years to see this moment of Bitcoin becoming mainstream. This is probably one of the most exciting moments for this space. So definitely stick with it. I think there's a lot of, there's going to be so many different news events that are negative. Just, think about why you entered this investment. If you still want to hodl, do that. Just make sure you're not panic selling because you heard something negative. I've been through a lot of FUD over 9 years, back since Bitcoin is $10. Bitcoin is an incredibly strong asset. It's in a great spot, and I don't think the bull run's over yet. So I'm going to be hodling.
I love it. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Cheers.